Those of you who have been part of this morning work in other cities know how it has been conducted and should be conducted, so do not hesitate to, just because there's a wider space between us, do not hesitate to let this meeting be just as informal and break in with those questions as they arise. First, do you see the nature of this meditation work? Do you see how, if you come to a place where the truth begins to impart itself to you, that you begin the demonstration of the transcendental teaching of the Master, that part of his revelation that has to do with I have meat the world knows not of, ye know not of. If you ask me, I could give you water, living water. In other words, there's a spiritual substance, a spiritual life, a spiritual force. There's a presence and a power within us, within all individual beings. And outside of the world of mysticism, that is not drawn upon in, shall we say, a spiritual way. In the artistic world, it is drawn upon every time a composer, painter, sculptor, poet, writer draws on the depth of his being. He is really drawing up from that infinite source. And that is why a person in tune with the depth of their withinness can paint, can create new ideas of buildings, bridges, architecture, and bring forth, well, it's called the creative principle or creative urge in man, the creative instinct in one. And those that have it know that they do not have to live on yesterday's manna. They can always turn within for a new idea for their poem, their story, their play. Now, as we turn within in that same way and touch the spiritual center and truth begins to flow from within, we are not then using our mental faculties except as vehicles of reception. We are then drawing upon our creative faculties, our spiritual faculties, the real being. At first, in this simple form of meditation that we are using, it enables us to get away from this thinking process, declaring process, affirming process, and turn to the listening process, to become a state of receptivity, to become a beholder of God, of truth appearing. And the action is very much as if we were creating a vacuum, and into that vacuum jumps the inspiration, the truth from within. The moment the flow of truth begins, something happens in our outer world, because truth is the substance of our outer world. As a matter of fact, our real spiritual outer world is truth itself in expression. And when we live lives of more or less human good and human evil, it is only because truth is not the substance of our experience. Human chance, accident, luck, circumstance, and condition become the substance of our outer experience. I can explain that to you in this wise. All of human experience, all of human experience not based on a spiritual foundation, is subject to laws. Laws of matter, laws of weather, laws of climate, laws of food, laws of chance. The insurance companies can give you tables of all the laws. How many baths you have to take before you fall down and have an accident in it. How many times you must cross the street before you become an average fatality. All human experience, separate and apart from a God contact, is subject to those laws. And it usually works out according to some of those averages, including 70 years and 10. Now, and the last few of those years not so well either. In the human experience, separate and apart from God, we are under the law. We're under all forms of law, infection and contagion and all the rest of these things. Now, there's no use of just walking around and denying this and saying it isn't true and it isn't real. The simple fact is, it is true and it is real according to human condition and circumstance. It is true and it is real in a life lived separate and apart from God contact. You can say it isn't true and it isn't real so far as God is concerned, but that will be of no benefit to you until God becomes an experience instead of a subject of conversation. Now, you cannot talk about God and think about God and bring the benefits of God into your experience. Yes, I perhaps should have qualified that. You can think about God and speak about God as a first step. But the speaking of God and hearing about God and reading about God is only a first step and not a fruitful one until it leads to God experience. God experience is the experience in which we as individuals come face to face with God, in which God becomes a living being, a living experience, a vital thing in our lives. You can know when that begins, when these impartations come from within that you hadn't thought up in your mind, that you hadn't fished around in your thought to bring to light, or that you hadn't dug into memory to bring forth. In other words, a spontaneous flow of which you become the hearer, in which you become the beholder. When that happens, you know that God has begun at least to be an active experience in your life. Now, just as the recognition that the water on the road in the desert isn't water but mirage is all that is necessary for the healing of that particular belief. In other words, once you've recognized that the water isn't water, it's mirage, You have nothing further to do than drive. The healing is complete. So when you begin to receive these impartations of truth, you have nothing further to do with demonstration in your life, since demonstration becomes the activity, the outer form of that activity of truth in your consciousness. In other words, the truth revealing itself to you within becomes formed as harmonious experience in the without. You do not have to enforce truth. You do not have to bring God into action. You do not have to use truth. You merely become a witness, a beholder, a hearer of truth, and then truth performs its own work. When this step begins, when this experience comes of a flow from within, the ability to sit back and let truth come, you begin an experience so vast that words cannot reveal to you the nature of your life from that moment on. There is a period in which one must be very careful, because there is a fine line of distinction that causes some at this particular period to lose their way. And of that I must caution you. The moment this flow begins and you are able to tap this inner source, understand what the Master meant by I have meat the world knows not of. I can give you water, even though I haven't a bucket to draw it with. I don't get this water from a well except from a well within. When that begins, you learn a great truth, and that is that we are complete. We are self-complete. That we need nothing from anyone or anything external to our own being, that we are ourselves the source of our good. We only turn within, regardless of what the need may seem to be, regardless of what the desire for fulfillment may be. We turn within, make that contact, become aware of that truth, and almost immediately or very quickly find fulfillment appearing in the outer world. And it is at this period that we recognize why I am self-complete. I am complete within myself. I am completely independent of outside sources and resources. And there, for a tiny moment, one must pause to realize that there is a capital S on that word self. We are self-complete, and this is really the truth of being. But we are self-complete in our godhood, not in our humanhood. As human beings, we are far from complete. As human beings, we are dependent on person, place, thing, circumstance, and condition. As human beings, we are dependent and interdependent. As human beings, we lack more than we can ever fulfill. It is only when we realize that touch, that contact, that realization of God, that we find ourselves to be so complete that all good flows from within our own being. Then comes the realization that that self-completeness is our self-completeness in God. That is, only because of our God contact are we complete within ourselves. Without that recognition, we come to an egotistical state of consciousness that is very dangerous. It is a state of consciousness that has come to many who have been successful, more especially those who have become successful through what appears to be their own efforts. There is apt to be a sense of glorifying the I, but glorifying the little I, and that leads to danger. We are self-complete, and we may say, I am self-complete, but only because the I is God, and only because we have touched that center of being which is God, only because God has touched us to its aliveness. And so, when we are alive in God, we are alive with God's aliveness, not man's. When we prosper in God, we prosper through God's prosperity, not man's. When wisdom comes forth, it is the wisdom of God coming forth, not the wisdom of man. But for us, there must be no question about this point. Every individual, in order to bring the reign of peace into their own experience, must find that completeness in God. They must find their completeness within, so that they lose this sense of dependence on others, whether for companionship or supply, whether for spiritual guidance or human guidance, or rather guidance in human affairs. This does not separate us from each other. It brings us together, but in a full and complete relationship of love, since, having touched our God source, knowing now the infinity of our being, we can share without expecting or demanding of others. We can share from that infinite nature of our being. We can share whatever it is that the world needs, whether it is healing the multitudes, feeding the multitudes, giving of the wisdom that comes to us, companionship, whatever it may be. We can meet every demand made upon us from our God resource. And just think of what it means to be able to be with people in family, friendship, nations, and to realize I can share of this infinity of my being without looking to anyone for anything. And then as the whole world comes into that realization, we are set free from those demands upon each other that have brought about this institution of lawsuits and finally wars. Wars are just the ultimate of lawsuits. When we can settle things peaceably through lawsuits, we do, and when we find ourselves unable to get the satisfaction there, we buy revolvers, and after that we declare wars. One step naturally leads to another if our fulfillment must come from out there. But once the realization has come that we can draw through meditation and receive these truths that guide, heal, direct, and feed us, from that point we go on to much higher attainments. We go on to the demonstration of all fulfillment in our life through turning within instead of looking without. to turn within and let truth unfold to you, you will catch the full meaning of the Word. God as the Word. And then you will know that the printed word in a book is not the Word, whether in a Bible or any other book. That the Word is the truth, of which these printed forms are but symbols, and that the truth is within you, and that the Word, the truth, the invisible Word or truth, appears to your awareness, and it becomes flesh as demonstration. You see that the entire secret, really, of the Master's teaching was a pointing to the kingdom of God within. Not this kingdom out here. I have overcome this world. But the Master's kingdom was a kingdom of the Word. The kingdom within. The Father within. Always it was that invisible God, understood as the Father or the Word, the truth. I am the truth. That truth is God. That truth within you is God. That truth coming to your awareness is God in action, God in manifestation, God in expression, the Word made flesh. Now, the Word and the flesh are instantaneous and simultaneous. There is no such thing as a Word resulting in flesh. The Word is flesh, but the Word must first be realized to become flesh. In other words, the truth fills all space, but people are sinning and dying and starving in spite of the truth filling all space, in spite of God filling all space. It is only when God becomes realized, the truth becomes manifest in your consciousness, uttered and received, that it instantly becomes flesh and dwells among us. There is the point. As a matter of fact, there is the answer to the question that you will hear almost every day of your life if you mingle with many people. How can you believe in God and look out at this world of sin, disease, death, horror, atomic bombs, hydrogen bombs, poverty, in man's inhumanity to man? How can you believe in God? And the answer is, you can't while looking at that picture. Nor can you believe very deeply in God while you look at that picture until you have come to this realization that the fact of God is not the saving influence. The realization of God is the saving influence. God is omnipresent. God is omnipotent. And God is available. God is no respecter of persons. And his rain falls on the just and the unjust. Oh, you have seen lots of the just who have suffered and lots of the unjust who have suffered without any help from God. And you will continue. Watch this as you perfect yourself in this meditation, and God expresses itself within you. God reveals itself within you. God utters itself within you. You become a state of receptivity to God. Then you will see that a God-governed life is a life lived in safety, security, peace, harmony, wholeness, perfection, in the degree of our receptivity to it. Now, God is equally available to all. I said yesterday, I believe, there are untold numbers of people in all churches, Protestant, Catholic, Hebrew, Oriental, who have realized God and who live God-protected lives, people who have never heard of metaphysics, because of their conscious awareness of God and of God's presence, God's power, the realized God. And on the other hand, there are still many people in the metaphysical world who know a great deal about God, who have not yet achieved health, harmony, wholeness, completeness, in spite of what they know with their mind. That is only because God still is in the realm of thought, in the realm of mind, in the realm of the intellect, not a spiritual experience. Through this meditation, through this ability to hear the still small voice, God becomes a realized experience. Yet in my flesh have I seen God. Anyone may see God who has the earnestness and the desire and the willingness to practice the presence of God. Brother Lawrence knew what he was about in this practicing the presence of God. It is only because, as humans, we have accepted a sense of separation from God that we now find it difficult to get back to God. And, of course, the printing press, which has been our greatest blessing in taking us back to God, is at the same time a means of continuing our separation from God. Because if we put all of our time and effort into reading, then the reading defeats its own purpose. The reading is only to reveal to us that we should stop reading long enough to go back to the kingdom of God within our own being. The reading is only to remind us, who have lost the way, that the way is within our own being. We are not to worship the books we read or the authors who write them. We are to be infinitely grateful to authors, writers, to books and booklets, and any other avenue that turns us back to the kingdom of God within our own being and helps us realize God, helps us realize the experience of God. Also, the time must come when we in the Occidental countries realize the nature of spiritual teaching and realize the function of a spiritual teacher. This thing of impersonal teaching is wonderful as far as it goes, but no one should ever forget that a person, whether coming to them as practitioner or teacher, any person who has caught a glimpse of spiritual life and existence, a person who has been touched by the Christ in any measure, can always help the individual who is not yet at that level. And the more advanced the spiritual teacher is, the higher they can lift the student until the student comes into the full realization for themselves. Then they in turn become the practitioner and the patient. Since God is no respecter of persons, anyone may progress not only as far as their teacher has gone, but if they will just spend one more hour at it than their teacher does, they can go an hour beyond what their teacher does. There's no limitation in this work for anybody except a self-imposed limitation. How much devotion can you give to the unfoldment of God? How much does it mean to you to find God, to meet God, to know God? How much of time, effort, study, practice will an individual put in? That is the only limitation, because once you have broken through and received the first impartation from within, the rest is just a matter of keeping at it, and keeping at it through long hours, through trying periods of trial and tribulation that may come in your own experience or in the experience of students or patients. But one thing is certain, the way is straight and narrow, and it is certain that at least up to this age, only a few have entered into that spiritual path. But fortunately, this is a promised age. This is the age in which it has been foretold that the world will come into spiritual wisdom. Now, the world will only come into spiritual wisdom as it attains the ability to commune with God. This is still on our subject of a higher concept of prayer, on living in that atmosphere of prayer. And as we learn to live in an atmosphere of prayer, as we learn to abide continuously in this Word and let the Word abide in us. You see, the Master gave us a formula. You abide in me and let my Word abide in you. There's your formula. You cannot miss. It is in the degree of our... Now, this little meditation, which was given me by grace, which I'm very thankful, has proven for many, many people the opening wedge, the opening of an inner consciousness that enabled them to commune with the Father. Because once this begins, once you develop this ability to sit back and let the Father speak, then you'll find that it can be a two-way program. Then you'll find that you can answer some of those truths that unfold, and in answering them or questioning further, receive even more light. It really becomes communion. Now, communion is more than a word in a book. Communion is an actual experience, and communion is an actual experience that anyone may have after they have become receptive and responsive to that flow of the Word from within. When that begins, the rest is up to the individual. Now, when you speak of the spiritual body, I don't feel that you mean it is a counterpart of the material body. That it is the same outline form. But the spiritual body, well, let us understand this very clearly about body. There is only one body, and that is a spiritual body. It wouldn't be very wise to try to imagine what it looks like. The human mind could never comprehend. The human mind can never know what the spiritual body looks like. You can only know the spiritual body in your moments of high spiritual illumination, when you behold the temple not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Now, there is a temple called your individual body. There is a temple called the body of this universe, or the body of a tree, or the body of grass, or the body of a flower, or the body of an animal. And all of these are the temple of the living God, the spiritual temple. And it is a temple not made with hands. It is a spiritual body, and can only be discerned by the spiritually enlightened individual in their moments of very high illumination. John beheld it and called it the temple not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Almost every practitioner has beheld a spiritual body, or the spiritual body, at some time or other in some treatment when they rose above the letter of truth and caught a spiritual glimpse of God or of reality. And in that glimpse, they beheld the spiritual body, the temple not made with hands. And there's no use of wondering about it or thinking about how it looks until one has had the experience. And the next question is, what is the beholder? Is it the Christ? That evidently refers to our teaching that we must become a beholder. I don't know how to answer that except to say that I am the beholder, or you are the beholder, or anyone who meditates and receives that word within them is the beholder, or anybody who comes to their desk in the morning and says, Father, what work are you giving me to do today? They are a beholder. Whether to call them the Christ or not, I don't know. I suppose that is how we look at it. I know it's individual, you and me, if that answers it. There too, we are so apt to want names and titles and distinctions with everything we do, and I can't quite see that. I'm satisfied that I am I, and I'm satisfied that when I am purely a human being, I need spiritual illumination and regeneration and enlightenment, and I turn to a metaphysical or spiritual study, and in time receive some measure of illumination, but it's still I. It was Joel then and it's Joel now. Whether you want to give me the name of mortal then and Christ now, I don't know. Or whether you want to still call me a mortal some part of the day and Christ other part of the day, I don't know. I only know this: such distinctions to me are meaningless. I, Joel, at one time was as separate and complete, or separate and apart from God as is possible to imagine. No awareness, no understanding of that which we call God, but with a hunger for it. And then the day came when a little light came, and a little more, and a little more, and I guess today I'm up to probably a grain of light. But I'm still Joel, and still desirous of more light, and I still am beholding whatever it is that the Father gives. And that's all I know. I am I. Does it avail to pray, open his eyes that he may see? No, I don't think so. I think that the prayer should be, open my eyes that I may see. Then when my eyes are opened, I may find that the he that I was talking about is pure spiritual being. He may be the Christ. Open my eyes that I may see. I am the only person in the world who has a demonstration to make. If there are any others, I don't know them. I have one to make, that I know. And I, so far as I know, am the only one who has a demonstration to make, because I am an individual, and there is no doubt about it that God is the creative principle of my existence, and that my existence can never be complete until I am home in him, until I am completely at rest in spiritual consciousness. Now, I have no right to say that about you. I have no knowledge of where you stand spiritually. I only know where I stand. And so I must have my eyes opened. And when you come to me for help, I dare not say, open your eyes. I must again say, open my eyes that I may behold the Christ. When I behold the Christ, as a rule, you say, I feel better. And so it is my eyes always that must be opened. Please explain, in my Father's house are many mansions. We understand that actually to mean that in God consciousness there are many states and stages of consciousness. There are many states and stages of consciousness in our own unfoldment and in the unfoldment of all those. And of course, we are in different states and stages of consciousness while we're on this path upward. Will one eventually rise above a sense of duality, or will it be something to contend with or refute throughout eternity? Will one eventually rise? One should rise now, this minute. That's why we're in class, for the purpose of rising above a sense of duality. As we meditate and this truth begins to unfold from within, duality has been overcome. We realize then that God is the all and the only one. And in that realization, duality has been overcome. The demonstration of complete union is a spiritual one that takes place on the inner plane and takes many forms. It takes the form of the spiritual marriage, the spiritual union described in the Song of Solomon. It takes the form of a complete sense of realization of oneness, and that one, God. It brings with it no loss of identity, but rather the realization of one's God identity. That inner illumination, that inner realization and revelation of oneness may be sustained or not, but as one remains on the path, it becomes a more frequent experience until the day comes that one lives in a continuous realization of God as the one. You will find that in love and gratitude. That is the state of consciousness in love and gratitude, where you see only God, know only God, expect only of God, and then find it appearing as man. Now, regardless of the demonstration or realization of oneness, that oneness will always appear as many. In other words, we in this room will never be absorbed into one figure. There will always be each one of us existing as separate or individual identity. But there will come to each of us the realization, yes, but the one mind of you is the mind of me. The one life of you is the life of me. The soul of mine of me is the soul of you. And our interests are all one. But that oneness will always be manifest in infinite form and variety. There will never be a time when there will be just a number one sticking up somewhere. That is not a giving up of duality. There is no such thing as all people being absorbed into one person. There is such a thing as oneness, meaning God is one and God is the only one, but God is infinitely manifested as you and as me. Is that clear? Do you see that? Never try this Oriental idea of wiping yourself out. Of wiping yourself out or wiping your body out. Never go in for that. Don't go in for denying the body. Never go in for a belief in absorption into deity. There is one, and God is that one, but God is infinite, and God must therefore appear infinitely. And this question has to do with a woman passing on, and before the experience, two practitioners. One who treats for the patient's release, that is, release from the human sense of life, and really means treating for a passing on. And the other who names this black magic. Well, while not going so far as to call it black magic, since there isn't that intent, there is no doubt that this represents a misunderstanding. And it is based undoubtedly on some of the New Thought premise of separate people being treated as separate people and giving the treatment to the person, and then probably coming to the belief that at some time or other the person must get old enough to die, and so we might as well let them die easily and peacefully. Whereas this would never be where there is spiritual vision, like I think the case of Peter's mother-in-law, was it, who was healed, probably an elderly lady. She wasn't permitted to pass on, and no one treated for her passing on, but for her being raised. Let us look at this way. We are not here merely to make sick people well or dead people alive. That's the way it may appear to the outside world. Our function is to realize God as the life of individual being. Now that life is not only deathless but ageless. So there's no such thing as old age, except in our acceptance of a universal belief. But in reality, there's no such thing as old age, nor is a person ever old enough to die or sick enough to die. And that is one of the things that we must understand about the Master's mission. The sick are healed. The dead are raised. There is no excuse for death in this work. There is no time when death can be excused or permitted. There is no reason to allow for it or to make provision for it, since death is absolutely an enemy. The last enemy that will be overcome, but an enemy. It is never a friend. It is never to be welcomed. It is never to be hastened. I do not care how ill the person is, what their condition is, what their age may be. I would undertake as practitioner to restore them to their what we call normalcy, through the realization of God as individual beings. Now, the fact that they may not rise to that demonstration, the fact that a person at 80 or 90 says, oh, I'm tired or weak or worn out and I want to go, that, of course, I could not prevent. That is their demonstration. But if they turn to me for help, you can bet I would sit up all night and try to prevent it, if necessary, for one reason. God is individual life, and I have to prove that at 90 years of age, 9 years of age, 9 months of age, 9 weeks of age. I have to prove that in the case of the unborn child. How many times have I been called to women in pregnancy where there was danger of losing the child? And was I to consider its age? No. And in the same way, I have been called to people of 80 and 90 and into the 90s As a matter of fact, one of my most cherished memories is a lady who is now past 105, who came to me at 90 years of age, old, weak, and blind, and ready to pass on. And she's now past 105 years of age in business. And I hear from her every single year. Oh, yes, we are not looking at the human being and trying to give them life or give them death. We are looking at God and understanding God revealed as individual being. I have said this before, I say it again. If our friend Mr. Hitler or Mr. Stalin had asked for help, we should give it, and give it with a wholehearted realization and desire for perfect demonstration of harmony here and now. For their sake, no. For the sake of God realization, to know that there are no exceptions in God, to know that God is no respecter of persons, to know that God's reign falls on the just and on the unjust. And so whenever we are confronted with an appearance of sin, disease, death, lack, and limitation, let us immediately turn to God and realize God as individual being, and if our patient is up to rising to the demonstration, they will come through. If not, at least we haven't accepted a sense of death ourselves. And so here, the woman who was working for release had not the spiritual vision to understand that God was the only life, and that we were demonstrating not a woman's life, but God's life made manifest as a woman. Is that clear? And now this question about an idea and in which there are several people involved, and the method of working on that problem, business problem. Now, the answer to that is this. In our way of work, we do not take into consideration any of the individuals involved in a transaction, any more than we would take the individual patient coming to us with a problem of health. What we take is this. All activity is of God. All spiritual activity is of God. All true activity or right activity is of God. God is the creative principle of the idea. Now, whether the idea is an invention, whether the idea is a story, a book, whether the idea is a new religion or a new teaching, whether the idea is one of world peace, if it is an idea of God, God is the creative principle of it, then we look only to God to maintain it, sustain it, promote it, finance it, give it its recognition, gain it its recognition, and ultimately even be the consuming public to utilize it, buy it, so forth. At every point of the demonstration, we look to God as the mind of individual being. Since God is the mind of individual being, God, the inventor or creator, appears as God, the one's necessary to the unfoldment. As in the case, let us say, just to illustrate, of real estate, if we see God, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof,
and we see God as the only landlord, then we see God as the only tenant. And not two, not a landlord and a tenant, but God appearing as landlord or God appearing as tenant, one simultaneously, instantaneously, never separate or apart from each other, never looking for each other. Never do we have a person looking for a home. Never do we have a landlord looking for a tenant. Never do we have a person seeking employment. Never do we have an employer seeking employees. Always we have God appearing as employer and employee, but always simultaneously one, like the illustration of our standing at the table of showbread and realizing the omnipresence of supply, not attempting to demonstrate supply. Our realization is omnipresence, and so it is. In this, my realization would be that God is the Father, the originating or creative principle of the idea. God as the mind of individual being, God appears as every individual necessary to the unfoldment of the idea, the completion of the idea, the perfection of the idea, the presenting and the acceptance of the idea. And that would be in every illustration. This is the same truth for a practitioner, for a teacher, for a center leader. The realization of God as the only teacher, God as the only student, God as the practitioner, God as the patient, but always one, instantaneous, simultaneous, here and now, never to be sought, never to be attained, only to be realized as here and now. God is the only mind, and that mind appears infinitely as inventor, financier, promoter, distributor, customer. That God appears as teacher, student, practitioner, patient. Always one and always complete. And that is why, just as the teacher can sit quietly at home and wait until the students come to them, the practitioner can sit quietly at home waiting for the patients to come, never seeking, never advertising, never desiring, always knowing right here where I am is my fulfillment. If it's to come as students or patients or customers, so be it, but that's not my problem. I sit here as fulfillment of God, God's fulfillment of itself. And so it would be the businessman, the salesman. Certainly he goes out on his rounds during the day performing the human functions of his job. But never does he go out to sell. He only goes out to perform the human functions of his job. The selling is done by God long before the salesman goes out upon his rounds. So, in fact, the salesman merely completes the transaction on paper, a transaction that was already complete in mind, as the activity of mind. Once we begin to see God as individual being, we will then see why there is no need to go out and sell things to people. They come and buy them. It's a strange reversal of the human picture, but a very true one. I've seen it too often to doubt it.